Gamakalpataro dalitam phalam shupamukat amrutadrava samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam puraho rasika bhuvi bhavuka yam yam vapi smaran bhavam jayatyante kalevaram tam tamevaiti kaunteya sada tadbhava bhavitaha tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmara yuthyacha Mayarpita mano buddhihi mame vaishyasi asamkshayaha. We have been relishing the lineage of Priyavrata. Priyavrata's son, Agvidra, who divided Bhuloka into several parts, and his son Nabhi then took over from him, and the landmass that is today Bharata was originally called Nabhivarsha. Nabhi's son was Rishabhadeva, the glorious avatara of Narayana, and Rishabha's son is the illustrious Bharata. Today, we will relish the legend of illustrious Bharata. The legend of Bharata teaches us several lessons. 3 of them are significant. Number 1, the significance of living life rooted in the principle of yajna, performing work, performing karma as kainkarya to Narayana. Number 2, the importance of a contemplative way of life and living. And number 3, constant remembrance of Bhagavan. A contemplative way of life and living is at the very core of the teachings of our Shastras. Meditation, dhyana, constantly thinking about Bhagavan are at the very core of sadhana prescribed by our Shastras. One may think that contemplation, meditation is the opposite of action. In fact, contemplation should be the very basis of action. They are not conflicting at all. They are rather complementing. Meditation, constant contemplation on Bhagavan should be the very basis of every action that we perform in our life and living. Contemplation on our deep values and our core purpose helps us to bring focus on what is important in life. Constant contemplation helps us to know the difference between what is important and what is urgent. It is very important to make this difference. The difference between what is important and what is urgent. In our life and living, our attention is always on what is urgent, dealing with what is urgent, and in that process, we completely ignore what is important. When we are acting constantly all the time, incessant activity, we completely forget what is the core purpose, what is most important in life and living. Therefore, contemplation helps us to make this difference. Contemplation also empowers us to reconnect and stay connected with the most empowering reality, Krishna. When we contemplate constantly on our deep values, it also helps us to choose actions that maximize value. That is the reason why a contemplative way of life and living is core to Sanatana Dharma. Contemplation and meditation leads to the topic of constant remembrance. Our Shastras always prescribe constant remembrance. The Gita loudly declares the only way to lead a successful life and living is to constantly remember Krishna. The legend of Bharata teaches us the importance of this remembrance. Remembrance of Krishna leads to three important things: unclouded intellect, pure mind, decluttered life. Our mind is crowded by desires, and therefore it is also clouded. And when the mind is clouded and crowded by desires, the intellect cannot function properly. We cannot discriminate right and wrong. We lack the clarity of thought. Our choices most often go wrong. And most often, we don't even choose, because our vasanas take over the act of choice making on our behalf. Remembrance of Krishna is like the sun rising in our mind, dispelling the darkness, bringing the clarity of thought, unclouding the intellect, helping us to have a clear perspective of life and living. Therefore, one of the biggest rewards of constant remembrance of Krishna is unclouded intellect. The second is pure mind, purity of mind. The more we invoke Krishna, the presence of Krishna with us and within us, the greater the purity, the greater the cleansing of our mind. Whether we like it or not, we cannot choose the content in our mind. Unfortunately, we bring into this life a certain amount and type of content. We cannot choose. And whether we like it or not, we also take in a lot of content in our life and living from the outside world, whether we like it or not. We cannot choose the content in our mind, but we can choose how to organize this content in our mind, how to filter, how to purify, how to ensure that we are not impacted. Remembrance of Krishna helps in this process of purification. And the third important reward of constant remembrance is declutter, a decluttered life. We have all made our life and living so very complex. Everything is crowded, cluttered. Too much dependence on the world and worldly things. When we constantly remember Krishna, we get freedom from the world and the worldly things. We also get alignment between what we know is good and what feels good. Most often, we are compelled to do activities based on what feels good, the diktat of our body. But the more we remember Krishna constantly, the more remembrance happens, decluttering happens. We get to understand what is important. The unnecessities in life automatically get dropped. All of a sudden, we discover that we have been carrying so many unnecessities with us throughout our lives. We are compelled to make so many choices every day on simple, mundane, trivial things, wasting too much of our energies on things that really do not matter whatsoever. Simple things, we walk into a supermarket and possibly we spend a lot of energy on picking a brand of chips. So many choices. Simplicity, declutter is a big reward of constant remembrance of Krishna. The legend of Bharata, therefore, is so very significant. It teaches us the importance of how to lead our lives rooted in yajna, regular worship of Bhagavan, be contemplative all the time, connected with our deepest values, and remember Krishna all the time. Antima Smriti is so very important. Remembrance at the last moment of one's life is so very crucial. Our Shastras declare very loudly the importance of Antima Smriti. And whenever we discuss the topic of Antima Smriti, when we delve deeply the topic of Antima Smriti in Bhagavad Gita, we immediately take up the example of Bharata, and specifically Jada Bharata. And now today, we get to relish in the 5th canto of Śrīmad Bhāgavatam the activities of Bharata, who was reborn eventually as Jada Bharata. Bharata began to rule the kingdom, which was then called Nabhivarsha, because it was Nabhi who was ruling the kingdom before Rishabha. Ajanabham namatait varsham bharatam iti yatarabhyaha yapadishnanti. So therefore, once Bharata began to rule the kingdom, the landmass got the name Bharata. It should be a matter of great pride for us that such an illustrious king ruled the karma bhumi we belong to thousands and thousands of years before. And what an illustrious king he was. What a great devotee he was. What a great example he was. Talking about the way Bharata led his life as a king, Shukha explains to Parikshit how Bharata was a great example, not just as a king, but as a devotee, where he led his life performing yajnas every day. Sampracharat sunanayageshu nirachitanga kriyeshu apurvam yattat kriyapalam dharmakyam pare brahmani yajna purushe sarvadevata linganam mantranam attaniyyamakataya sakshat kartari paradevatayam bhagavati vasudeva eva bhavayamana atmanaipunyamridita kashayoho havihi svatvaryubhir grihyamane sayajamanoho yadabhajo devamstan purusha avayeshva abhyadyavatu. Seems Bharata as a king realized the importance of performing yajnas and invoking the blessings of all the devatas. Every yajna invokes a devata. Every yajna, oblations are given to please a devata. And Bharata knew that he can run the kingdom together with the help of all the devatas. At the same time, he also knew that every yajna that is performed, ultimately the oblations are offered only to Yajna Purusha, Paramatma, Śrīmad Narayana. And therefore, he realized that all the devatas are like the parts that belong to one organic whole. He realized that it is the Paramatma who is the Vibhu, and every devata is a glorious Vibhuti of that one single supreme being. And therefore, when he performed yajna, he was constantly contemplating on this nature of, on the glorious nature of the supreme being, knowing fully well that he is the Antaryami of all, he is the Vibhu, he is the Karma Paladhata, he is the bestower of all the rewards, and he is the Yajna Purusha. Thus, his kingdom was flourishing. There was abundance everywhere, and the citizens loved him, and he loved every citizen. Therefore, he was an ideal example of a Maharaja. Eventually, Bharata, after running the kingdom for several years, decided to go on Vanaprastha. And as it was the custom, Bharata decided to renounce everything and walked out to the forests. And he decided to go northwards towards Pulahashrama. Pulahashrama on the banks of the famous river Gandaki. Yatrahava Bhagavan Harit Adyapi Tatratyanam Nijajjananam Vatsalyena Sannidhapyata Iccharupena Yattashrama Padani Ubhayato Nabibhil this Chakrais Chakranadi Nama Sarit Pravara Sarvatah Pavitri Karoti. Chakranadi. The Gandaki river is also called Chakranadi. The serene environment of Pulaha Ashrama on the banks of Chakranadi. This place is so very special, Shuka says. Of all the places in Bhuloka, this place on the banks of Gandaki river, which is also called Chakranadi. Chakranadi is so very special because here Bhagavan continuously keeps manifesting in several forms in order to please his devotees. In the form of various Shaligrama Shilas, he constantly presents himself, keeps manifesting in various forms to please his devotees. Therefore, this is a very special place. Here, every Shaligrama Shila has the mark of his chakra. That is why these Shaligrama Shilas that are found in this river Gandaki, the river is called Chakranadi because of the presence of chakra on every Shaligrama Shila. And it is where the great sage Pulaha used to be setting up his ashrama, and this is where Bharata proceeded to spend his time in Vanaprastha and continue to worship Bhagavan. There on the banks of river Gandaki, Bharata continued to worship Narayana on a daily basis, and he performed all the rites, continuing to meditate on Bhagavan. And Shukha immediately says, Suryacha Bhagavantam Hiranmayam Purusham Ujjihani Surya Mandale Yupatishtan Yetadyuho Vacha Varorajas Savitur Jatavedaha Devasya Tarkaha Manasedam Jajana Turetasada Punaravishchachaste Hamsam Gitranam Vishabringiram Imaha. Every day, a day does not start for Bharata before he prayed to Surya Mandala Madhyavarti Narayana, chanting the glorious Rigveda mantra. Teyasada Savitrumandala Madhyavarti Narayanaha Sarasijasana Sannivishtaha Keyuravan Makarapundalavan Kiriti Hari Hiranmayopuhu Shanka Chakraha. Looking at every day, Bhagavan Surya is celebrated in our Shastras as he is the witness. He is the witness for every action that we perform. He is the Jagat Chakshu. He is the Karma Sakshi. Surya Deva is our Karma Sakshi. He is Jagat Chakshu, the eyes of the universe. He is the Karma Sakshi. We cannot perform any action without him noticing it. He is a constant. He constantly reminds us that every action that every living being performs is witnessed by him. And Narayana, as Surya Mandala Madhyavarti, is the one who is the source of the power of Surya. The Surya Bhagavan who ensures the sustenance of Bhuloka. The energy, the light, and the heat that are given by him are all infinitesimal fragments of the infinite power of Narayana. And Bharata began every day by performing worship to Surya Mandala Madhyavarti, the Pundarikaksha, the Hiranmaya Purusha, who is the Antaryami of Surya, and thus he went into deep meditation on Narayana day after day after day. And then it so happened, as he was spending his time on the banks of Gandaki river, an incident happened that entirely changed the life of Bharata. On a day when Bharata was performing ablutions on the bank of river Gandaki, he witnessed a pregnant deer being chased by a ferocious lion. The pregnant deer began to run and ran into the waters. It was gripped with fear and it was terribly shaking. And in fear, it delivered. It happened, the premature delivery happened. It delivered a calf and it started to cross the river and midway lost its life. Bharata took pity on the calf and he decided to adopt the calf. And then and there started a new relationship between Bharata and the young deer. Bharata started to take care of the parentless calf and over a period of time began to develop attachment. His life started to revolve around the calf, taking care of it. Bharata, who started his day contemplating on Bhagavan, began to start his day contemplating on the deer. Bharata, who did not take food without offering it to Bhagavan, started to take food only after feeding the deer. His entire life and living started to revolve that he was so very attached to the deer that he was only thinking about the well-being of the deer. Then, when the moment arrived for his departure, he was so very worried, so very shaken. He was worried for the welfare of the deer, and then at that very moment when he lost his life, at the very moment when the Atman departed the body, he was only thinking about the well-being of the deer. Yam yam va vismaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram tam tamevaiti kaunteya sada tatbhava bhavitaha. And as the Gita declares, in his next birth, the illustrious Bharata took the life of a deer. Our outlook at death governs the outcome after death. This is an unchangeable rule of life. Our outlook at the time of death determines the outcome after death. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram. Antima smriti. whatever experience we crave for, the Atman, whatever experience the Atman craves for, the embodied Atman, the next birth is determined by that nature of the experience that is craved for. Whatever one contemplates on at the time of death, that is the state that one attains in the next birth. It is very important, therefore, to understand that the outcome after the death, the nature of the body that one gets, the kind of environment that the Atman gets into, depends on that driving thought, that contemplation that happens right at the last moments of life, Antima Smriti. We need to know that our belief system not only colors our perception, but the perception of reality not only colors, but it also becomes our reality. What we believe colors our perception of reality and eventually becomes the reality. What we think is the source of pleasure. What we treat that has greatest value in our life, that becomes the pivot of our reality. Throughout our life, whatever we consider as the greatest source of pleasure, throughout our life, what we consider as the greatest value to us, that becomes the very pivot of our reality. And that is what will determine the outcome after death, which means that is what will determine our next birth. What we are attached to in this life will determine, because the more the thoughts that we process in our mind, the stronger the impressions. And that is what would be the driving force for the contemplation at the very last moments of one's life. That is the reason why Krishna in the Gita categorically declares, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalevaram tam tamevaiti kaunteya sada tadbhava bhavitaha. One attains the same state in order to experience the craving that one left off. Wherever one leaves the life with the cravings and the desires, one starts off chasing the same in the next life, getting the same kind of body that is conducive. And therefore, Krishna says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmarayudhyacha mayarpita manobuddhihi mame vaishyasi asamshaya. Therefore, in order to reach him, attain him, one needs to constantly contemplate. The Antima Smriti, one can contemplate on Krishna at the last moment of one's life only when that contemplation is dominant throughout one's life. If Krishna is the source of the greatest value in one's life, if he is the source of the greatest pleasure in one's life, that would be the dominating thought, that would be the dominating contemplation that happens throughout one's life, and that would determine the nature of Antima Smriti. The demands and desires of life, unfortunately, push Krishna Bhakti to the backseat. We are so very carried away by the demands and desires of materialistic life. Krishna Bhakti is there. We are all on the right track, but still the danger is it takes the back seat. It is like in the drive of life, Krishna Bhakti becomes a spare wheel. It is there, but it becomes a spare wheel. We are so very carried away, prioritizing everything else. We end up saying, yes, we understand Krishna Bhakti is very important. Contemplating on Krishna is important, but we will come to it. At some point, we'll come to it. It's like a spare wheel. It has to be ideally the steering wheel, not the spare wheel. In the drive of life, Krishna Bhakti has to be our steering wheel. Contemplation on Krishna has to be the fundamental foundation that has to drive everything else. There is no conflict whatsoever. contemplation on Krishna versus doing the right action. In fact, the actions that we choose to perform, the value is maximized when it is founded on blissful contemplation on Krishna. There is no conflict whatsoever. Therefore, Bharata is the greatest example for us to demonstrate how the constant contemplation on what is not needed. And in the case of Bharata, we see that by contemplating on the calf, the deer, Bharata takes birth. Luckily for him, he has that remembrance of his previous birth. And as a deer, he rushes towards Pulaharshama. He continues to wander around Gandaki river and be amidst all the Brahmanas, the rishis there. And because of that punya of association with the Bhagavatas there, he then takes next birth as a Brahmana. Now, Bharata is very clear. He has taken the birth of a Brahmana. Now he is very clear that this has to be his last birth. He is a Brahmajnani, but he is also concerned that he should not be compelled to prolong his tenancy in the cycle of samsara. Therefore, he takes a very important call. He decides not to use most of his indriyas, limited usage. He decides to keep his mouth shut and his ears shut and even his eyes shut. He almost remains inert, jada, almost like Achit, not really doing anything to the outside world. He remained like almost like a stone, like a jada. And his father was so worried that he was trying to teach him the Vedas, teach him the Shastras, without really knowing that Bharata in this birth is already a Brahmajnani, only that his effulgence was covered. And therefore, people started calling him Jada Bharata. Jada because he looked inert, dull, dumb, deaf, as though he had no abilities whatsoever. And this Jada Bharata continued living only by contemplating on Bhagavan all the time. While the rest of the world did not know what was happening to him, while the rest of the world thought he was just an inert person, fit for nothing, he was blissfully contemplating on Narayana all throughout. There was a time when he was kidnapped by some dacoits. While he was meditating on Bhagavan, some dacoits who wanted to give Narabali to Kali kidnapped Jadabharata. As he was able-bodied and young and strong, they thought he is a right gift. And therefore, they wanted to sacrifice him to Devi Kali. And when he was about to be sacrificed, Devi Kali realized who Jadabharata was, and then and there manifested, and she immediately destroyed all the dacoits and protected Jadabharata. And Jadabharata continued his life as an avadhuta, as a mendicant, completely renouncing everything, not properly dressed, not really caring for the body at all, and just going on. He had no permanent place, no secure place, nothing that he owned. He was only doing one thing, contemplating on Narayana all the time. It was during that time that the king of Sauvira, Rahu Gana, who wanted to meet with the illustrious Kapila in order to understand Brahman, in order to obtain Brahma Jnana. King Rahu Gana wanted to meet with Kapila and he began to journey towards Kapilashrama. Rahu Gana was carried on a palanquin by his carriers, and he was traveling in the forest. And from the other side, Jadabharata was also walking without any aim. For Jadabharata, it did not matter where he was walking, which direction he was walking to. He just had to spend the rest of his life in order to gain moksha. So he was just wandering, and he happened to meet with Maharaja Rahu Gana. It is this meeting between Maharaja Rahu Gana and Jadabharata which is so very fascinating. A fascinating conversation ensues between these two. This is a very beautiful episode in not only in the 5th canto, but in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, one of the gems. The conversation between Jadabharata and Rahugana, where Jadabharata ends up instructing Rahugana, gives gems of wisdom, Atma Jnana. The discussion between Rahugana and Jadabharata happens in a very interesting context. It's so very fascinating. The context is so very fascinating. The way the conversation begins, it does not begin as a conversation between a student and a teacher. Rahugana is being carried on a palanquin, and the carriers of the palanquin wanted an add-on additional help. And as they were going on, they were looking out for some able-bodied man who can give them a helping hand. And then they find Jadabharata, young, strong, stout, very healthy. And then they immediately request him to help them carry the palanquin. Jadabharata did not even understand what he was being asked. He was only contemplating on Narayana, and he just went in with the flow and gave them a helping hand. He also started to carry the palanquin along with the rest of the carriers. But Jadabharata was deeply immersed in Narayana Dhyana, and therefore he was very clumsy handling the palanquin, and the palanquin began to shake because he was not aligned with the rest of the carriers who were all professional carriers, and he was not really paying attention to carrying because he was having his own blissful time, and the palanquin began to shake. And Rahugana looked out to understand what was going on, the reason for the discomfort. All the palanquin carriers understood that the king would be furious. They immediately began to defend themselves, saying, "Oh Maharaja, it is this man who is the cause for all the trouble. Look at him, able-bodied, strong, but he is unable to move swiftly. It is because of him that all the disturbance is being caused." Rahugana gave a glance, looked at him, and thought the very fact that he looked at him would set right things. But Jadabharata did not even care for who was sitting on this palanquin. He was continuing with this blissful experience of Bhagavan. And the palanquin continued to shake, rock and roll. Rahugana was very, very uncomfortable. And then Rahugana looked out, and he was very sarcastic in addressing. Rahugana was, after all, a king, and he was quite proud that he was the king. And he looked at this man, Jadabharata, and he began to address him very sarcastically. He looked at Jadabharata and said, "Hey, dear friend, I understand this is so very troublesome. I'm giving you a lot of trouble here. I know that you are very old. You are very thin. You are very weak. I know. And then you have been carrying this palanquin all alone for a long distance. And you should be very fatigued indeed. And I know that Others are not really cooperating with you. In a very sarcastic tone, he was addressing him. In reality, essentially, the message he was giving was, what the hell are you doing? You are an able, fit, strong, young man. How can there be fatigue? Others have been carrying this palanquin for so long. You just came in, and aren't you able to carry? What kind of a person are you? That was the message he wanted to give, but he was sarcastically addressing him, thinking that it would kind of give the message to Jadabharata. Jadabharata did not care for what Rahugana said. He continued to completely disregard Rahugana and went on having his own blissful contemplation. The palanquin was only rocking and rolling, and Rahugana could not contain himself. He was very angry, infuriated. He lashed out now at Jadabharata. He looked at Jadabharata, now said, what kind of a person are you? You are as good as being dead, even though you are alive. Don't you realize that I am the Lord, I am the Master? Don't you realize you are after all my servant? How dare you disobey me? How dare you do not execute my commands? Just like how Yama gives punishments to all the living beings, I am now going to punish you. You beware. You better come to your senses and do what you're supposed to be doing. And then Rahugana was shocked and surprised. He was expecting some kind of a reaction from Jadabharata. There was nothing. No reaction whatsoever. The same calm, pleasant, composed demeanor. Not an iota of any reaction on the face of Jadabharata. Jadabharata, calm and composed, responded to Rahugana. Brahmana vacha. Vayoditam yaktam avipralabdham bhaktussame syat edivira bhara. Canto yadisyat adigamya atva tiveti rasauna vidam prabhadaha. Jadabharata also speaks in riddles. So this conversation is so very fascinating, it's so very profound philosophy. Also spoke in riddles. Jadabharata looks at Rahugana and says, Vayoditam yaktam avipralabdham. Hey Rajan, what you have explained, what you have spoken is perfect, he says. This is the last answer that Rahugana was expecting. He looks at him and says, whatever you said, I understood. Perfect. What you said is right. No doubt about it. Bhartussame syadadi veera bhara. This burden, this load is being carried by my body. I am not carrying it. I am not the carrier. The carrier is my body. I understand there is a load that is being carried, but it is being carried by the body. I am not the body, therefore I am not the carrier. Gantur yadisyar adhigamyam adva. You said you need to be going somewhere. There has to be some station, some goal has to exist for a way to exist. I don't see either you have a goal nor the right way. Piveti rasauna vidam pravada. You must know that this, what you said, stout, strong, weak, all of that are adjectives applicable only for the body and not for me. For one who is self-realized, this topic is not the topic of discussion at all. You must know, Rajan, that when you said, you addressed me, you said, I am strong. I am not strong. I'm not weak. I'm not strong. I'm not young. You're right. I'm not strong. I'm not young. At the same time, I'm not old. I am not weak as well. You must understand that. All of this are not adjectives that describe me. They only describe my body. Therefore, what you said is right, but you also must understand that when you said I am the carrier of the palanquin, you must also realize that I am not the carrier of this palanquin. When a Brahmagyani talks like this, it can be a little confusing as well. It's like saying, I am not my body. When we talk like this in our day, in our day-to-day life with someone who does not know what the Shastras talk about, immediately the first thing that comes to their mind is only one thing: madness. Something is wrong with this man. Immediately, Jada immediately says, Staulyam Karshyam Yadhaya Adhayascha Chutridbhayam Kaliricha Jaracha Nidraratir Manyuraham Madashuchaha Dehena Jatasya Himine Shanti. Staulyam Karshyam Yadayaha Adayaha Chutridbhayam Kalihi Icha Jara Nidra Ratihi Manyuhu. All of this belong to the realm of the body. Staulyam, being very stout and strong. Karshyam, being skinny and weak. Yadayaha, the pains of the body, diseases. Adayaha, the disease of the mind, the pains of the mind. Kshutrith bhayam, hunger, thirst, fear. Kalihi, quarrel between people. Icha, the various kinds of desires. Jara, old age. Nidra, sleep. Ratihi, attachment. Manyuhu, anger. None of this belong to me, here, Rajan. This is exactly what Krishna says in the 13th chapter of the Gita. Icha dvesha sukham dukkam sankhatas chetana dhritihi etat kshetram samasena savikara mudahritam. Talking about the kshetra, the body made up of prakriti, says sankhatas chetana dhriti. Sanghataha, this body is sanghata, is composed of various physical elements, is only a vehicle for the Atman. Icha, Vesha, Sukha, Dukkha, all of this belong to the body, not to the Atman. It is only because the Atman is associated with the body, it experiences Sukha and Dukkha, which are alternating all the time. It is only because the Atman is associated with the body, it has various kinds of desires. Icha. It is only because the Atman associated with the body, it has dvesha, all kinds of hatred. Otherwise, icha, dvesha, sukha, dukkha, staulyam, karshyam, yadayaha, adayaha, kshutrad kalihi, icha, jara, manyuhu, ratihi, all of this do not belong to me. They all belong to the body. And I am different from this body here, Rajan. You must understand this. Now, Rahu Gana slowly is finding out what kind of a person he is dealing with, because he expected Jadabharata to react. But here, instead of being passionate, Jadabharata is being compassionate. Instead of being disturbed, he's only concerned. That's why he's responding. When one understands the difference between the Atman and the body, rises above the bodily identification, one is never disturbed. May be concerned, but never disturbed. One is never passionate, can only be compassionate. One understands that one brings the gap between situations and emotions. Situations are determined by the world. Our emotions are determined by us. Very important to know that while the situations are determined by the world, our emotions are determined by us, not by the world. And when we bring a gap between the situations and emotions, then we can respond intelligently instead of reacting impulsively. This is what Jada Bharata demonstrates here. Instead of reacting impulsively to Rahu Gana, he responds intelligently because he does not have this bodily identification. When the Atman identifies with the body, the situations and the emotions are rolled into one. There is no gap between. Everything and anything evokes and triggers all kinds of emotions. Jada Bharata is very cool, calm, and calm. Rahu Gana is now impressed with the way Jada Bharata is responding to him. Jada Bharata continues. He looks at Rahu Gana and says, Visesha buddhe vivaram manaksha pashyamayanna yavaharato nyate kaishwaras tatra kim yishitavyam tathapi rajan karavava kimte. He says, he looks at here, Rajan, kaishwaras tatra kim yishitavyam. Kaishwaraha kim yishitavyam. You said, you are the master, you are the Lord. Who is the Lord? Who is the master? Kim yishitavyam. Who is to be controlled? Who is the servant here? You must understand, Rahu Gada, you declaring, assuming yourself the Lord, and I am your servant, you are the master. It's a false assumption. The conversation you began with me, Rahu Gana, was based on a very false assumption. Who is the master? Who is the slave? The master-slave relationship is only possible between a Jivatma and the Paramatma. Between the Jivatmas, no relationship is permanent. Between two embodied Jivatmas, the relationship keeps changing constantly. Today you are a master, today you are a king, tomorrow you may be a pauper. You cannot be a master, I cannot be a servant. Both of us are servants, and no, there is only one master. So therefore, don't assume you are the master, you are the servant. But you must understand that we are not the master. Both you nor me are not the masters. We are not the masters of our destiny. It's a very profound wisdom that Jada Bharata is sharing with Rahu Gana. We are not masters of our destiny. Then are we makers of our destiny? Yes, we are. There is a difference between being a maker and being a master. We are makers of our destiny, but we are not masters. Our destiny is nothing but a cumulative sum of all our previous karma, good and bad. It's a cumulative of all our previous karma, part of which translates into some kind of outcomes, good experiences or bad experiences. Every action that we perform has a result. Every action has a result. So therefore, there is some contribution towards the result from our side. Our karma, our action is contributive in nature, but not definitive in nature. To understand this, we have to think about an acronym, DOT, D-A-R-T. DOT means rush, race. Look at life as a race from birth to death. It's a race. It's a dart, darting from birth to death. Dart, D-A-R-T. Destiny, action, result, and time. A result, using a mathematical formula, result is equal to A plus D plus T. Every result is equal to A, our action, plus D, destiny, plus T, time. Action, whatever action that we perform definitely contributes to the result, but there is also another factor called destiny, which is nothing but the accumulation of karma, bad or good, which fructifies. This is where time comes in. We cannot determine what part of our karma, how and when fructifies at this very moment. It is Bhagavan and Bhagavan alone decides how our karma manifests based at a particular time, which adds on to the outcome. That is the why result is equal to our action plus destiny plus time. So therefore, we are makers of our destiny, but we are not masters of our destiny. That is why many a times we experience a very tiny good action may result in a massive reward. A tiny small good action may result in a massive reward. That result would have no direct one-to-one relationship with the kind of action that is performed. Why? Because at that very time, our punya karma is also adding on to the result. Similarly, we also experience that a very small wrong deed will also result in a catastrophe. At that very time, our papa karma is also manifesting, adding to the outcome. So, how can you ever think, Rahugana, that you are the master? No, you are not the master of your own body. You are not the master of your destiny. How can you say you are my master? Neither you nor I are masters. You have to understand this. Unmattamatta jadavat swasamstham katasya me veera chikitsitena artakkiyan bhavata shikshitena sabda pramattasya cha pishtapeshaha. Jadabharata looks at Rahugana and says, no, some may even think when I talk like this, some may even think I am unmatta, matta, jada, mad, intoxicated, jada, inert, fool. Unfortunately, one who is soaked in worldliness, a spiritual person will look like a mad person. One is soaked in worldliness, a sane person would look like a fool. Without really realizing that who is the real fool, who is really mad, it is like a heavily drunk person. A heavily drunk person would look at everybody else and thinks everybody else is not in control. He alone is under control. One who is soaked in worldliness thinks everything is under his control and nobody else has any control whatsoever. So here, Jadabharata is giving a perspective and actually putting forward a dilemma to Rahugana. Rahugana said, I'm going to punish you. He says, Jadabharata says, Rahugana, I must realize I am not mad, I am not drunk, I am not inert. Why? Because I am realized, I know who I am, I know my true nature. And therefore, there is no way that you can punish me, because at best, you're only punishing my body. You can never punish me. On the other hand, even if you take it for granted, even if I am mad, I am drunk, and I am jada, even then, when you punish, it is like punishing, it is like that punishment is like beating a dead horse. He says, Sabda pramattasya cha pishtapeshaha. It is like grinding grounded grains. What is the point in once again grinding grains which are already powdered? It is waste of time. There's no point in punishing a madman. He's not going to come out of his madness. So therefore, hey Rajan, don't even threaten me. In a very nice words, because the king tried to threaten him, he basically put Rahugana in his place, says, these threatening words will make no difference whatsoever. Rahugana now realized who is standing in front of him. Kastam nigudas charasit vijanam vivarsi sutram katamo vadutaha kashyasi putrahi ihai kasnat. Immediately, who are you? Hey Mahatma, now I realize you are not an ordinary person. Who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going? The very fact that you're here, I know you are here to do something good for me. Are you the very Kapila himself who has come right in front of me? Are you in Kapila, who's standing right in front of me. Aham cha yogeshwaram atmatattva vidam muninam paramam gurum vai prashtum pravartah kim iha aranam tat sakshat dharim jnana kalavatirnam. Immediately he falls at his feet. He says, you are Yogeshwara. I know that you are a great yogi. You are not an ordinary person at all. Even though the Brahma Jnana in you is covered, just like how fire is covered by ashes. Your effulgence is covered, but now I recognize that you are a Brahma Jnani. You are a great Bhakta. You are a great Jnani. You are the very maybe you are, if not Kapila, you have to be his representative, because I was going to get Brahma Jnana from him, and so blessed I am that you are standing right in front of me. I was only going to know the answer to one question. Kim iha aranam? What is the greatest source of shelter in this life and living? I wanted to know the answer to this question, and right here I am in front of you, and I know that I have reached my master, my guru. You are my guru who is going to impart wisdom to me, and therefore I beseech you, I want to know the answer that is plaguing me. I want to know the answer to this question, Kim iha aranam? I want to know in life, what is the great source of shelter? This question triggers further conversation, and the conversation between Jadabharata and Rahuguna continues, where Jadabharata imparts Brahma Jnana to Rahuguna. We will continue to relish this fascinating conversation between these two great Jnanis in our next session. So from Sri Krishna.